Today we are looking at a case from the first part of the 19th century, so sit back as we go to France. Pierre François Lacenaire was born on the 20th of December 1803 in the French city of Lyon. He was the fourth child and second son of Monsieur Jean-Baptiste Lacenaire and his wife, Madame Marguerite Gaillard. From an early age, Pierre believed that he was unwanted by his parents, particularly because his mother clearly preferred his elder brother, Jean-Louis. Pierre understood that as the eldest male child, his brother would inherit their father's assets, leaving him to forge his own path. This reality became even more apparent when Pierre was sent away to school, while Jean-Louis enjoyed the benefits of a private tutor. Despite these challenges, Pierre proved to be an accomplished scholar. In October 1813, he enrolled into the college at Saint-Chamond, where he quickly gained recognition as a brilliant student, especially in literature, winning 4 prizes for his achievements. However, by the end of the 1816 school year, a classmate revealed to his father that Pierre had made comments favourable to the Protestant religion. This outraged Monsieur Jean-Baptiste Lacenaire, who immediately removed his son from the college and instead placed him in a Catholic school in the small village of Alli, which was about 30 kilometres north of Lyon. Here Pierre studied hard and was praised by his teachers, as his academic results were outstanding. The following year, Pierre commenced his studies at a college at Lyon, where he found himself among several equally intelligent classmates. Unfortunately, his time there was short, as he was expelled in March 1818, following a student revolt. He was then offered an apprenticeship with a silk manufacturer, which he gladly accepted. However, at the time in France, apprenticeships were either unpaid or provided only minimal compensation, and due to this, Pierre started to experience financial difficulties. His father advised him to return home, promising to teach him business. Pierre took this advice, and although he learned very quickly, it was apparent that he really wanted to go back to academic studies. So in October 1818, Pierre was enrolled into the Royal College of Chambéry. Unfortunately, he did not take advantage of this opportunity and was expelled a year later for engaging in a physical altercation with a priest, who he accused of inappropriate behaviour. Knowing he had disappointed his father, he was reluctant to return home and sought work elsewhere. He eventually secured a position working for a lawyer in Lyon, where he hoped to rebuild his life and gain some financial stability. However, by 1820, he once again found himself in a difficult financial situation. With no other options, he reluctantly decided to return to his parents' residence. Once there, he discovered that his father's business was no longer thriving, and the family was facing significant financial challenges of their own. The strain of their economic hardships created a tense atmosphere in the household, and this led to frequent arguments and a growing sense of frustration. Despite his financial struggles, the escalating tension at home became unbearable. So determined to escape the constant conflict and find a semblance of peace, Pierre returned to the lawyer's office in Lyon, even though this meant that he would have to continue with his precarious financial situation. He worked in Lyon for the next 4 years, before moving to Paris in 1824. He had an aunt who lived in Rue Bar-du-Bec, and she agreed to let her nephew stay with her. Pierre had always been good with words, so while in Paris, he ventured into a literary career, writing poems and delivering compelling performances in small theatres. Despite his efforts, he received no pay or formal recognition. However, after some work of his was printed in newspapers, his enthusiasm for writing diminished. By the end of 1825, disillusioned with life in Paris, he decided to seek new opportunities elsewhere. But he was broke, so using a false name, he enlisted in a Swiss army regiment that was serving in France. He quickly rose to the rank of quartermaster, but he did not like the army life, so he deserted and returned to Lyon. Needing to find employment, he secured a job as a liquor salesman, which meant that he travelled to Paris, England and Scotland. However, he continued to gamble and spent money beyond his means, which again led to financial difficulties. He turned to his family, but with problems of their own, they refused to assist. In a desperate attempt to acquire funds, Pierre resorted to forgery. Naively, he carried on using the name Lacenaire, which meant that the police could easily trace the forgeries back to him. As he had no money, it was again down to his family to reimburse the debts that his forged notes had created. By now, Pierre's brother Jean-Louis had decided that they should no longer support him. He believed that Pierre was incapable of living a normal life and would always be a burden to the family's finances. Despite this, Pierre continued searching for his place in society. In early 1828 he went to Geneva, but after being denounced by a Swiss accomplice, he engaged in a fatal duel, so quickly returned to Lyon. However, he had again accumulated debts, which his father once again agreed to settle, on the condition that Pierre enlist in the army, but this time under his real name. With no other option, Pierre agreed and signed up in May 1828. Unsurprisingly, he failed in his duties and was disciplined by his regiment. In March 1829, unable to accept authority, he once again deserted. His life had become a procession of missed opportunities, each one leaving him unfulfilled and restless. Pierre very much admired a man named Pierre François Lacenaire, a former head of the French National Police Force. He was well known in France for his efforts in modernising law enforcement and his use of new investigation techniques. However, Monsieur Pierre François Lacenaire had himself once been on the wrong side of the law and had a remarkable story of redemption. He had served time behind bars for assault and forgery, had escaped prison and been recaptured, and was eventually given a royal pardon. In his memoirs, he described prison as a university of crime, where he gained the knowledge that he was later able to use in his police duties. This idea fascinated Pierre. Inspired to follow a similar path, he decided to get himself convicted and put in prison in order to gain criminal experience. In order to do this, he committed theft and killed a man in a duel. Of course, he was arrested, however not for killing a man in a duel. Instead, he was charged with fleeing the scene of a crime. But this was of little consequence, as his objective had been achieved, and in September 1829, he was sentenced to a year in prison. He was first sent to the prison at Bicêtre, before being transferred to Poissy, where he met Victor Avril, Jules Baton, and Jean-François Chardon, three infamous criminals who were all well known to the police. Pierre was released at the end of 1830 and found work as a public writer, but he was again drawn to criminal activities and the thought of quick money. For the next few years, his life became a cycle of imprisonment and temporary freedom. During one of his periods behind bars, he befriended a group of Republican activists and managed to anonymously publish several poems in their anti-establishment newsletters. He was released in August 1834, and as he struggled to find work, he returned to his life of crime. At the end of 1834, Pierre once again met up with Victor Avril, who he had befriended while incarcerated in the prison in Poissy. They had heard rumours that their former cellmate, Jean-François Chardon, had managed to get his hands on a lot of money by impersonating a priest and selling counterfeit religious items. The two men decided that they needed to relieve him of this alleged fortune. So on a cold December morning, they went to the home he shared with his mother on Passage du Chevalier Rouge. As Jean-François opened the door, Pierre and Victor rushed inside. Pierre wielded a dagger and attacked the unsuspecting man, while Victor hit him with a hatchet. Moments later, Jean-François Chardon was dead. As they searched the house for money, they discovered the deceased man's mother in bed. Not wanting any witnesses to their gruesome crime, they suffocated her with her own pillow. However, the rumours of Jean-François' wealth proved to be false, as they only managed to find 700 francs in his house. Despite this, Pierre proclaimed the crime a triumph. No one was immediately apprehended for the two murders on Passage du Chevalier Rouge. Pierre, however, was still quite desperate for money, so together with a notorious thief named Hippolyte Francois, he devised a plan to commit an elaborate fraud. He would cash a forged cheque, which exploited the 1830s banking process, where a bank employee would deliver cash to an agreed address once a cheque had cleared. Pierre travelled to the city of Dijon and presented a forged cheque under the name of Drevenhouse. He then gave the bank clerk an address and instructed him to deliver 3,000 francs. However, when the bank employee arrived to deliver the money, Pierre and Hippolyte attempted to rob him. Fortunately, the employee managed to escape and promptly reported the incident to the police. Meanwhile, Victor Avril was again arrested in Paris, so in order to try and negotiate a lenient sentence, he revealed Pierre and Hippolyte's involvement in the Dijon bank fraud, and also provided the police with Pierre's aunt's address. Officers were immediately dispatched to see her. By now she was living in fear of her nephew, and provided the police with a detailed description of Pierre, including all the preferred aliases that he used. With this new information, officers travelled to Dijon, where they arrested Pierre, who was going by the alias Lacenaire du Galliard. Though he now admitted his real identity, he claimed that he was completely innocent of any crimes. Nevertheless, he was charged with forgery and attempted robbery of a bank clerk, and was put in prison until his trial. However, while in prison, he was attacked by inmates, apparently paid for by Hippolyte François to ensure his silence. Now fearing for his life, and having been informed that Victor Avril had betrayed him, Pierre confessed, not only to the attack on the bank clerk, but also to the murder of François Chardon and his mother. When officers reminded him that this confession could lead to his execution, Pierre responded, "It doesn't matter, as long as it finishes them too." The trial of Pierre François Lacenaire, Victor Avril, and Hippolyte François began on the 12th of November 1835 at the Seine Assizes Court in Paris, and proved to be a sensation. It seemed as though the authorities used the trial as a way of diverting attention from the prolonged trials stemming from the 1834 Republican riots and the impending trial of Joseph Fieschi, an Italian-born conspirator who had attempted to assassinate King Louis-Philippe on the 28th of July 1835. Fieschi, along with his co-conspirators, had engineered an infernal machine featuring 25 gun barrels that had been designed to discharge simultaneously. They had been placed strategically along the King's parade routes on Boulevard du Temple in Paris. However, their attempt to kill the King failed, but tragically they claimed the lives of 18 individuals, including Marshal Mortier, a prominent military figure. The press and the public were soon captivated by the trial, particularly by the enigmatic figure of Pierre. He commanded the courtroom, transforming it into his own personal stage. His charisma and theatrical demeanour fascinated onlookers, turning the legal proceedings into a dramatic spectacle. His sharp wit and eloquent speeches were widely reported, and people followed every twist and turn of the trial with keen interest. The case became a sensation, with Pierre's larger-than-life persona at its heart. In stark contrast to his co-accused, Pierre was articulate and refined, defying the appearance of what a criminal was supposed to look like. He even managed to turn his time in court into something of a social affair, when he declared, "I kill a man like I drink a glass of wine." This line, of course, was picked up by the newspapers and widely reported. Despite the typically strict etiquette that was expected in French courtrooms, Pierre's dramatic behaviour captured the attention of the entire city of Paris. Surprisingly, rather than being reprimanded, he was permitted to proceed in the same manner, which highlighted the extraordinary nature of the trial and the considerable public interest it generated. Women seemed to be particularly attentive to the courtroom proceedings, apparently entranced by the romanticised persona of the accused, who with an air of detached indifference admitted to his crimes. However, he also put the blame on Victor Avril and Hippolyte François, telling the court that they were equally guilty. It was thought that Pierre believed that their previous treachery towards him warranted a collective punishment. Pierre was defended by a well-known and successful lawyer, who tried to convince the judge that his client was in fact insane. He did present compelling arguments that were designed to elicit sympathy from the court. However, despite his efforts, Pierre's previous confessions and the damning evidence against him overshadowed any attempts to absolve him from guilt. When the trial ended, Pierre François Lacenaire and Victor Avril were both found guilty of the brutal murders of Jean-François Chardon and his mother. They were then sentenced to death. Hippolyte François was found guilty of fraud and received a life sentence in prison. Of course, the verdict and sentences were appealed. While in prison, awaiting the decision of his appeal, Pierre wrote his memoirs and several poems. These further enhanced his reputation as an educated gentleman. His appeal was eventually denied, and on the 9th of January 1836, along with Victor Avril, Pierre was executed at the prison in Barrière Saint-Jacques. For his execution, he wore a blue frock coat, which was later purchased by collectors of all things gruesome and macabre, and only helped to add the legend that had grown around him. Throughout his life, and even in death, Pierre François Lacenaire has managed to captivate the public's imagination. His writings and the sensational details of his trial have created a lasting image of a cultured yet ruthless criminal. This combination of intellect and brutality made him a figure of both fear and fascination, securing his place in history as one of the most notorious criminals of his time. Hello everyone, and thank you so much for listening. As usual, please leave any comments or feedback you may have, and I hope to see you all again in the next Brief Case